On March 15, 2028, the world held its breath. The newly elected government in Taipei made a historic announcement. It formally declared Taiwan an independent and sovereign nation. This act was seen in Beijing as the ultimate provocation. China had long considered Taiwan a breakaway province. It immediately condemned the declaration as an act of secession. Chinese leaders issued a final ultimatum. They demanded that Taiwan reverse its decision within 48 hours or face a full-scale military response. The international community watched, hoping for a diplomatic off-ramp that would never come. Tensions that had simmered for decades were now boiling over into an open crisis that threatened to engulf the entire region. 2 days later, the ultimatum expired. At dawn, the skies over the Taiwan Strait filled with smoke. China launched a massive barrage of missiles. These were not aimed at military targets alone. They struck critical infrastructure across Taiwan. Power grids failed. Communication networks went dark. Major ports were hit, creating a de facto blockade. The goal was clear: to cripple the island's ability to function and resist. Simultaneously, a sophisticated cyber attack targeted Taiwan's government and financial institutions. This was the first phase of an operation designed to force a swift surrender, a modern-day blitzkrieg combining digital warfare with overwhelming physical force. The world was witnessing the start of a major conflict. The United States had long maintained a policy of strategic ambiguity. It had never explicitly promised to defend Taiwan, but it also sold Taiwan defensive weapons and maintained a strong military presence in the Pacific. As China's assault began, the U.S. moved several aircraft carrier strike groups closer to the region. It condemned the attack and called for an immediate ceasefire. Beijing saw this as direct interference. In a shocking escalation, Chinese forces launched a surprise missile attack on American military bases in Guam and Okinawa. The strikes were precise and devastating. They were a clear message: stay out of this fight. This attack on U.S. soil was the point of no return. Back in Washington, the decision was swift. An attack on American territory could not go unanswered. The president addressed a stunned nation and the world. He announced that the United States was now officially in a state of armed conflict with China. The declaration activated long-standing alliances. Japan, its own territory now under direct threat from the missile strikes on Okinawa, immediately invoked its mutual defense treaty with the U.S., Australia, and the United Kingdom, part of the AUKUS Security Pact, also pledged their full military support. The regional conflict had now become a global one. World War III had begun, not with a single gunshot but with a calculated volley of missiles and a cascade of political decisions. The initial days of the war were defined by technology. China leveraged its vast arsenal of anti-ship ballistic missiles to enforce its blockade of Taiwan. Its navy patrolled the surrounding waters, daring the U.S. fleets to enter the strait. In space, Chinese anti-satellite weapons targeted key American GPS and communication satellites. This created chaos for U.S. military operations, temporarily blinding their navigation and intelligence systems. On the ground, swarms of AI-guided drones were deployed over Taiwan. They hunted for military targets with terrifying efficiency. It was a new kind of warfare, one where algorithms and autonomous machines played a central role in every skirmish and every strategic decision, making the battlefield more lethal than ever before. The U.S. and its allies quickly mounted a powerful response. American aircraft carriers, though initially forced to operate from a safer distance, launched waves of stealth bombers and fighter jets. These aircraft targeted Chinese naval assets and mainland missile launch sites. U.S. cyber warfare units working with allied intelligence agencies launched a massive counteroffensive. They disrupted Chinese command and control networks, creating confusion among their forces. The Allies also deployed their own advanced weaponry. Hypersonic missiles launched from submarines and long-range bombers struck strategic targets deep inside China. The Pacific Ocean became a deadly chessboard, with each side using its most sophisticated technology to gain an edge. A critical aspect of the conflict was the formation of global alliances. While Japan, Australia, and the UK stood firmly with the United States, most of the world tried to remain neutral. Russia, a traditional partner of China, announced its neutrality but quietly supplied Beijing with resources and intelligence. This support was crucial for China's war effort. European nations were divided. They condemned the aggression but were hesitant to commit military forces, fearing economic retaliation and the expansion of the war to their own continent. India, a regional rival of China, increased its military readiness along its border, but stopped short of entering the war directly. The conflict was primarily a Pacific war, but its geopolitical ripples were felt everywhere. The fighting was intense and costly. China attempted a massive amphibious invasion of Taiwan, but it was met with fierce resistance. Taiwanese forces, armed with advanced American-made anti-ship and anti-air missiles, inflicted heavy losses on the invasion fleet. U.S. nuclear-powered submarines, stealthy and lethal, became the silent hunters of the sea. They sank numerous Chinese warships and submarines, severely hampering China's ability to sustain its blockade and reinforce its troops. The dream of a quick victory for Beijing had vanished. Instead, the war settled into a brutal and bloody stalemate, with casualties mounting rapidly on both sides as the weeks turned into agonizing months of relentless combat. As the military conflict raged, a second, quieter war was being fought on the economic front. This battle was just as crucial to the outcome. The United States and its allies imposed a sweeping economic embargo on China. They froze Chinese assets held in Western banks and cut the country off from the global financial system. This move was designed to starve China of the resources needed to fund its military machine. The impact was immediate and severe. Global supply chains, heavily reliant on Chinese manufacturing, collapsed almost overnight. Shortages of everything from electronics to essential goods became common in countries around the world, causing widespread economic disruption and civilian hardship. The world's financial markets went into a freefall. The New York, London, and Tokyo stock exchanges saw their worst crash in decades. The price of oil skyrocketed as shipping lanes in the Pacific became war zones, disrupting the flow of global energy supplies. In response to the Western embargo, China weaponized its own economic power. It halted the export of rare earth minerals, which are essential for producing high-tech military and commercial products. This created a crisis in the defense and technology industries of the U.S. and its allies. The economic war became a vicious cycle of sanctions and counter-sanctions, with each side trying to cripple the other's economy and break their will to fight. Cyber attacks became a primary tool of this economic warfare. State-sponsored hackers from both sides targeted critical civilian infrastructure. Chinese hackers attempted to shut down the U.S. power grid and disrupt its banking system, aiming to cause panic and chaos among the American population. In return, Western cyber units targeted China's state-owned enterprises and financial institutions. They wiped out data, stole sensitive information, and disrupted industrial production. This digital front was lawless and chaotic. It blurred the lines between military and civilian targets, making every citizen with a bank account or a smartphone a potential casualty in the escalating global conflict. The very foundations of the modern, interconnected economy were under assault. The human cost of this economic war was immense. Inflation surged globally, and unemployment rates climbed to historic highs. In nations not directly involved in the fighting, governments struggled to manage food shortages and energy crises. The conflict revealed just how fragile the globalized world had become. The intricate web of trade and finance that had brought prosperity for decades was now a weapon that caused suffering on a massive scale. The economic pain intensified the pressure on all sides to find a way out of the war, as leaders realized that a prolonged conflict could lead to a worldwide depression, unlike anything seen before, potentially destabilizing governments far from the battlefield. After months of brutal fighting and devastating economic warfare, the conflict reached its most dangerous moment. With its invasion of Taiwan stalled, and its navy suffering crippling losses, the leadership in Beijing grew desperate. In a televised address that sent a chill across the globe, the Chinese president warned that his country was prepared to use tactical nuclear weapons against U.S. naval forces in the Pacific if they did not withdraw. The threat was a terrifying gamble, an attempt to force a de-escalation by threatening the unthinkable. For the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world stood on the precipice of nuclear war, a single miscalculation away from unimaginable destruction. The American response was firm and unequivocal. The U.S. president went on air moments later speaking directly to the world. He stated that any use of nuclear weapons by China, tactical or otherwise, would be met with a swift and overwhelming response. The United States placed its nuclear forces on high alert. The message was clear. Nuclear escalation was a line that could not be crossed. The world watched in terror as the two superpowers stared each other down. This moment of extreme tension finally shocked the international community into unified action. Neutral nations led by a coalition of European, African, and South American countries began to exert immense diplomatic pressure on both Washington and Beijing. Faced with the real possibility of global annihilation and a collapsing world economy, both sides cautiously stepped back from the brink. The intense international pressure, combined with the catastrophic costs of the war, created an opening for diplomacy. Secret back-channel negotiations began, facilitated by the United Nations and neutral third-party states. The talks were tense and difficult, with deep mistrust on both sides. But the alternative, a full-blown nuclear exchange, was too horrific to contemplate. Slowly, painfully, the framework for a ceasefire began to take shape. The primary goal was to stop the fighting and pull the world back from the edge of disaster. Ultimately, an uneasy peace was brokered. The agreement called for an immediate cessation of all hostilities. China would withdraw its forces from the Taiwan Strait, and the US would pull its carrier groups back. The resolution to Taiwan's status, the issue that started the war, was left deliberately ambiguous. Taiwan was not forced to rescind its declaration of independence, but it was also not granted formal recognition by the international community. It was left with de facto autonomy, protected by an international peacekeeping force. The war was over, but no one had truly won. The world was left scarred, the global order was fractured, and the peace felt fragile, a temporary truce in a new era of great power competition.